If you do not believe that out in the old American West, there was once a giant Apache woman who ended up with two men both claiming her as their wife, then stay with this story until the end. Because it did not begin with love. It began with a promise that almost died on a battlefield. That year, Red Butte was a small town stranded in the dry lands of Arizona, the kind of place where the wind blew so hard, people joked it could strip the memories out of your head. A railroad line cut straight across town, and a few big trains still stopped there each week. But beyond that, Red Butte had nothing special to offer. Just red dirt streets, a dusty saloon, and one failing ranch on the eastern edge that looked like it was one good storm away from collapsing. That ranch belonged to Caleb Turner. He was about 38, a widower with a thin frame and a back that had started to curve from too many years of hard labor. Since the day his wife and young child died of illness, Caleb had moved through life like a shadow. He spent his days drifting between a few scrawny cows and a patch of cracked, rocky ground that barely deserved to be called a field. The ranch was losing money. The county was threatening to take the land for unpaid taxes, and Caleb no longer had the strength for heavy work. Still, he clung to that house with everything he had left. It was where he had buried his wife and child. Out here, losing your land did not just mean losing property. It meant losing the last piece of yourself. That same summer, Naya appeared at the ranch gate like a strange wind nobody had ordered. No one in Red Butte had ever seen a woman like her. Naya stood close to 6'3", shoulders as wide as church beams, arms packed with muscle so thick that 3 grown men carrying the same log together would not match the strength of one of her hands. Her skin was darkened by the sun, her long black hair tied high off her neck, and her eyes were sharp enough to make a man feel like she could see straight through him. The cowboys in town used to joke, half laughing and half afraid, that Naya could probably snap a horse in half with her bare hands if she got mad enough. But what made people respect her and fear her in equal measure was not only her size, it was her bluntness. If someone said something wrong, she corrected them. If someone pushed a joke too far, she would simply stare at them until their voice died in their throat. And yet, there was something gentle in the way she bent down to help children gather firewood, or reached out an arm so an old woman could cross the street without falling. That was why Naya had managed to live in Red Butte for 8 weeks without causing any real trouble, even though she was Apache, and this was a time when prejudice was heavier than stone. Naya had come to Red Butte looking for a temporary refuge for the few relatives she had left after a brutal army sweep. She took any work she could get in exchange for clean water and a little food. The day she walked up to the Turner Ranch, Caleb was trying to lift a sack of seed. His back hurt so badly he could not straighten up. Naya stopped, watched him for a few seconds, and then spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, like she was stating something obvious. "If you are this weak, how are you supposed to hold on to this land?" Caleb looked up at her. He did not snap back at her like most cowboys would have. He just let out a tired breath. "You are right," he said quietly. "I'm about to lose it." Naya stepped forward without another question, bent down, and hoisted the heavy sack of seed onto her shoulder, as if it were nothing more than a pillow. Caleb watched, caught somewhere between amazement and despair. A woman had just done the one thing his body could no longer manage. When she set the sack down on the porch, Caleb could only get out one simple sentence. "What do you want in exchange for the work?" Naya answered without hesitation. "A roof to sleep under, and a well to draw water from. I can work for 3 men." Caleb looked out over the dry, failing ranch. He felt the ache in his back, the way his breath had shortened just from trying to lift that one sack. Then he nodded. Not because he trusted an Apache, but because he needed someone, anyone, to help him survive one more season. That was how they began. Two people who could not have been more different, hanging on to the same thin hope. Naya took every heavy task: hauling wood, mending fences, chasing off wolves, carrying water, even fixing the roof of the cattle shed because Caleb could not climb up there anymore. Caleb handled the lighter work: cooking supper, planting a small patch of vegetables, keeping the account books, teaching Naya a few English words she had not learned yet. At night, they shared the same table. They did not talk much, but it was not an angry silence. Just two tired souls resting in the same small pool of quiet. Red Butte started to talk, of course. Some said Caleb was a fool for letting a huge Apache woman live under his roof. Others swore Naya was just using him. But none of them understood what was really forming out there on that dry stretch of land. The simple, stubborn existence of a quiet space that two lonely people shared with each other every evening. One day, the town announced that any landowner without a legal family on record was at risk of having their property seized. That night, Naya looked at Caleb and said one sentence that made him drop his bowl of soup. "Then marry me, on paper only. You keep your land, I get a roof. Nobody owes anybody." Caleb Turner had never heard a proposal that direct in his entire life. Naya folded her arms and tilted her head, watching him as if she had just suggested something ordinary. "Do you want to or not?" Caleb stammered. I do not even know what to say." Naya's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Staying alive matters more than feelings. You keep your land, I keep my people." Caleb looked into those fierce eyes and knew she was not joking. And so the strangest marriage Red Butte had ever seen began on a plain afternoon with no flowers, no ring, and no promises of romance. Just two people trying to make it through another year. What they did not know was that only a few months later, a second husband would walk into that same ranch yard. He would come with eyes full of the kind of sorrow you only see in someone the world already believed was dead. And from that moment on, the story of the giant Apache bride would turn down a road no one in Red Butte ever dared to tell out loud. Their wedding happened on a windy morning, in a tiny church right in the center of Red Butte. No invitations, no flowers, no music. Just a creaking wooden door and the disapproving stare of an old preacher who had never liked Apaches. Naya stood so tall, her head nearly brushed the doorframe. When the preacher asked if they agreed to be husband and wife, Caleb answered so softly the man made him repeat it. Naya, on the other hand, nodded so firmly the little table between them rattled. When they stepped back out into the wind, the whole town watched them with narrowed eyes. Some whispered that Caleb had married her because he was afraid she might beat him if he refused. Others said Naya must be after something. Land, money, who knew? But those words blew away with the dust, because neither Caleb nor Naya cared. For them, this marriage was nothing more than a way to survive. Back at the ranch, Naya set the marriage certificate down on the table and spoke as clearly as if she were laying out the terms of a contract. "You sleep in your room," she said. "I sleep out on the porch. Nobody touches anybody." Caleb's face flushed, even though she was the only one who had brought it up. I wasn't thinking anything else," he stammered. Naya shrugged. Her face stayed serious, but her voice softened a little compared to the church. "Good. Then we go back to work." And just like that, the Turner Ranch began to change. All of Red Butte saw it. The sight of this towering woman, so tall they had to widen the barn door for her shoulders, dragging a heavy plank that 4 grown men together hadn't been able to budge. Folks watched and still couldn't quite believe a body like that could be so fierce in one moment, then so gentle the next, cupping a newborn calf in her arms, or carefully tightening the saddle strap for Caleb so it wouldn't chafe the horse. Caleb changed too. A man who had almost given up started to come back to life. He cooked. He mended shirts. He mixed herbal salves for Naya when her hands got cut or scraped. Sometimes, in the evenings, he'd sit with her and explain a few tricky English words she hadn't learned yet. In return, Naya taught him how to read the wind, how to drive off wolves without firing a gun, how to read tracks in the sand like sentences in a book. Somewhere along the way, without either of them meaning to, they became part of each other's routine. Every night after the work was done, Caleb would bring 2 bowls of hot stew out to the porch. Naya would sit right on the boards, long legs stretched so far, her boots nearly touched the bottom step. She ate the way she lived, direct, no fuss. Sometimes she'd drop a blunt, honest comment that left Caleb half laughing, half unsure how to respond. One evening, as he handed her a bowl, Caleb asked, "Naya, how are you that strong?" She looked at him like it was the strangest question in the world. "Because if I were weak," she said, "I'd be dead already." The words were simple, but they hit Caleb hard. He had never thought that strength could be carved out of grief or forced into a body by years of running from war and hunger. Another night, Caleb was feeding the fire when a sharp pain shot through his back. He had to brace one hand against the wall just to stay standing. Naya noticed, walked over without a word, and slipped an arm around him. Her hand was nearly twice the size of his, warm and steady. "Sit," she said, quieter than usual. She knelt behind him and pressed her thumbs gently along his spine, just the way the elders in her tribe had once taught her. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The pain eased. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "It's all right," Naya replied. "You are weak, but that is not your fault." Somehow, that sentence warmed him more than anything anyone had said to him in years. Little by little, the town grew used to the sight of them. The skinny, soft-spoken rancher and his giant Apache wife who could carry a full water barrel in one hand. They weren't exactly tender the way other married couples were, but there were moments, small, quiet moments, that made people look twice. Naya sitting under the shade of a tree while Caleb read a newspaper beside her. Naya fixing the roof while Caleb stood below, handing up nails and boards. Tiny, ordinary scenes that built a quiet familiarity neither of them fully noticed. But everything truly changed on a cold morning at the end of autumn. Naya was leading the horses out to the field when a strong gust of wind swept in, carrying with it the distant pounding of hooves. She stopped, lifted her head, and stared out toward the desert. Her eyes darkened. A group of riders was moving steadily toward the ranch. At the front was a man whose face she never expected to see again. An Apache warrior who had been missing for years. The man her tribe had once promised would be her husband. The man Naya had been sure was dead. Koda. And in that moment, with the sound of hooves echoing across the cold ground, everything began to change. Koda came back to the ranch on a wind-heavy morning, when the sun was still low on the horizon and the red sand was cold underfoot. He rode slowly, every step of his horse heavy, as if each yard that brought him closer to Naya carried a fear he did not know how to name. Caleb was fixing a fence when he heard hooves on the hard ground. He turned and saw Naya standing perfectly still, her eyes locked on the man riding in. Her posture was always strong, but now there was a tightness in her shoulders that made Caleb set his hammer down. "Who is that?" he asked quietly. Naya did not answer. The Apache warrior stopped a few paces away. He was almost as tall as Naya, with the hard, solid build of a man who had lived his whole life in the wild. Long hair fell over his shoulders. His face was set and serious, and his eyes held something soft and painful at the same time. When he spoke her name, Caleb did not understand the Apache words that came before or after, but he understood the feeling. Naya. No one had ever said her name like that in Caleb's hearing, with a familiarity that sounded older than this ranch, older than Red Butte itself. Naya stared at him so long that even the air between them seemed to thicken. At last she spoke, her voice low, and her words froze Caleb where he stood. Coda, I thought you were dead. That one sentence explained everything. Caleb felt his feet move back a step before he even realized he was doing it. Coda looked from Naya to Caleb, his gaze steady, not hostile, but so deep it made it hard to breathe under it. I came back to find you, he said in rough but clear English. The tribe told me you left, that you live among white people now. But I did not believe. I knew you were alive. Naya's hands clenched at her sides, yet she did not answer right away. She turned her head and saw Caleb trying to keep his face calm. The two men looked at each other, and even though no one had said it out loud yet, the truth lay between them like a heavy stone in the yard. Caleb searched for words. You are someone from Naya's past. Coda did not soften the answer. I am the man she was promised to. The sentence was small, but it cut deep. Caleb stood still, unable to speak. Naya stepped back, her voice dropping. Coda, that is over. The day you were taken, everyone thought you died. I could not wait for you forever. Coda held her eyes. I spent 3 years in a camp. Every night I thought I would never see you again. But I survived, and you are still the woman I am meant to marry. That has not changed. Those words felt to Caleb like the ground shifting beneath his boots. He knew his marriage to Naya was only a matter of paper and survival. Yet after all those months of sharing work and quiet dinners on the porch, feelings had grown in him that he had never dared to name. With Coda standing there, those feelings were dragged into the open light, whether he wanted it or not. Naya shot Coda a warning look. No one decides for me anymore. Coda hesitated, but he did not step back. You are my promised wife. You cannot belong to this white man. Caleb's hand tightened around the hammer, then slowly loosened again. He was not the kind of man who fought with his fists, not the kind who wrestled for a woman like a prize in a saloon. But he also was not a man who ran from the truth. Naya has a voice, he said quietly but clearly. What she chooses is hers to choose. Naya looked at Caleb, then at Coda. 2 men, 2 worlds, 2 very different ways of loving. Her chest felt heavy, as if someone had set a stone on it. I am not something the 2 of you can fight over, she said, her voice sharp and hot. If either of you talks about me that way again, I will break this whole fence myself. Caleb went silent. Coda went silent. The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Naya drew in a long breath and went on. I am Caleb's wife under the town's law. I am also the woman promised to you under Apache tradition. Both of those things are true. Neither one is a lie. Caleb's eyes were clouded with confusion. Coda's eyes were full of hurt, but he did not look away from her. Then who do you choose? He asked. Naya looked at the 2 of them the way a person looks at 2 roads they cannot bear to abandon. She did not answer, because she knew this was not a simple story about picking one man and leaving the other behind. Not today. Not while her heart was still split between the life she had survived and the life that had quietly grown around her. When the wind rose again and swept red dust across the yard, Naya turned and walked back into the house, leaving the 2 men standing in the open like 2 different shadows, both cast by the same woman whose heart was too big to hold only one kind of love. That very night, Red Butte began to whisper. Folks said there was going to be a fight. There was going to be blood. There was going to be a man lying dead in the red sand before long. But they were all wrong, because Naya was already turning over a choice in her mind, a choice no one in that town would ever have dared to imagine. That night, the wind from the desert blew harder than usual, driving red sand across the roof and tapping against the door like the hesitant knock of someone afraid to come in. In the small kitchen, Caleb sat beside a dying oil lamp, his hands trembling slightly. He did not know if he was about to lose something precious, or if he had never truly had anything to begin with. Out on the porch, Coda sat as still as stone, his eyes fixed on the darkness where Naya had disappeared. Neither man spoke, but the silence between them was tight as two ropes pulled in opposite directions, ready to snap with just one wrong word. When Naya stepped back into the light, both men rose to their feet without thinking. She looked at them, not soft, not angry, just utterly certain, the way only someone who has lost too much can be when she decides she will not lose again. "Both of you sit down," she said. Neither of them dared to argue. Caleb sat first, fingers laced together. Coda sat a breath later, shoulders tense, as if he expected trouble from any direction. Naya stayed standing between them, so tall that her shadow fell across both men at once. "I'm going to say this once," she began. "I am not a prize. No one gets to win me." Caleb lowered his head. Coda's brow tightened, but he did not speak. Naya went on. "Caleb did not marry me for love. He married me to keep his land, and I said yes, so I could have water and shelter. But I do not see him as a stranger anymore." Those words made Caleb lift his eyes, a faint light breaking through the worry in them. Then she turned to Coda. "And you, Coda, you were the man I thought was dead. When I heard you were gone, a part of my heart died too. But the past does not get to walk back in and claim me like a thing." For the first time, Coda's gaze wavered. No matter how strong he was, there was no shield against words that honest. Caleb watched them, and for the first time, he truly understood that what lay between Naya and Coda was more than a tribal promise. It had once been hope, the shared future of two young people who had grown up beneath the same sky. Naya took a slow breath and said the one thing neither man would have predicted. "I am not choosing one of you." Caleb almost shot up from his chair. Coda's hands clenched tight, but Naya lifted both of her large palms, and they stayed where they were. "Let me finish," she said. She looked straight at them, her voice sharp and clear, like a line drawn in the dirt. "I am Caleb's wife under white man's law. I am Coda's promised wife under Apache law. Both of those things are true. I am not erasing either one, and I am not abandoning either of you." The air in the room seemed to stop moving. Caleb stared at her without blinking. Coda breathed slowly, as if he were holding his heartbeat back. "I know this sounds crazy," Naya said more quietly, "but you both need me, each in your own way. And I need both of you too. One of you understands the pain I have carried. The other gives me a peace I have never known." She turned to Caleb. "You gave me a home." She turned to Coda. "You gave me my roots," Caleb whispered. "But people will say we are wrong." Naya shrugged. "They have been talking my whole life. I stopped caring a long time ago." Coda looked deep into her eyes, as if measuring his own heart against the path she was laying out. "Naya," he said softly, "if this is the road you choose, I will walk it with you. But I will not live as someone left outside the door." She nodded. "You will not be left outside anything, but you will not lay old laws on me anymore either." At last, Caleb spoke again, after a long stretch of silence. If this is what you want, then I will not let go of you either." Naya studied him for a long moment, then rested her big hand gently on his shoulder. Her touch was so light that Caleb felt held up, not held down. "You never tried to own me," she said. "Mana, that is why I respect you." When the three of them finally stood, no one called it a family. No one tried to name what it was. But there was one thing all of them felt. The fear of losing each other had loosened its grip, and as they stepped back inside the house, something strange began to happen. The tension that had been wound so tight started to fade like smoke, making room for something new. Hard to label, but deeply human. Warm. Real. And in that moment, on the edge of Red Butte, a kind of family that no one had ever dared to imagine quietly came into being. Red Butte changed slowly, but some things shifted so quietly that even the people who lived there could not tell when it started. The patch of land on the eastern edge, the one that had almost been taken for unpaid taxes, became a place people pointed to when they wanted to remember what it looked like when something refused to die. The Turner Ranch, once as empty as the heart of a widower, was now full in the strangest way the town had ever seen. Naya was still the giant woman everyone had to look up to. She still crossed the yard with that powerful walk, shoulders broad, arms strong enough to lift a newborn calf off the ground without effort. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They no longer held the hunted look of someone driven to the edge of the world, no longer carried the wound of a warrior who had lost her tribe, her land, and every plan for the future. Now there was a steady calm there, the peace of someone who knew she finally had a real home. Caleb stood on the porch with a cup of hot coffee in his hand. His back did not hurt the way it once had, not with two people beside him who always seemed to know when to pull him up before he slipped too far down. Coda, after months of living between two worlds, had grown used to brushing off the stairs from town. He had built a small lodge beside the horse corral, but most days he was in the house, sharpening blades, braiding rope, or simply leaning against a post, watching Naya work like he could stand there and do that for the rest of his life. To an outsider, it might have looked like three people sharing chores to keep a ranch running. Those who paid closer attention could see it was more than that. There was something steady and deep at work, something that did not need a name to be true. Something like a family, but not like any family people were used to. Something like love, but without chains or demands. It was as if three badly wounded hearts had finally found a place to set themselves down and breathe without flinching. On some evenings, when the sun slid behind the red hills and the breeze softened across the porch, Naya would sit between the two men. She was so large that Caleb and Coda looked smaller just by being near her. When Caleb talked about his first wife and the child he lost, Coda sat quietly and listened, as if that grief now belonged to him too. When Coda spoke about the years in the camp and the way he woke each morning afraid he had forgotten the face of the woman he loved, Caleb would lay a hand on his shoulder, as if to tell him, without words, that he had made it back to the place he was meant to reach. And when Naya finally shared the stories she usually kept locked away, stories about running through the night to dodge soldiers, about smashing stone with her bare hands because there were no men left in the tribe strong enough to do it. The two men did not try to fix anything. They just sat there, listening, understanding, staying. Red Butte watched, guessed, whispered, then slowly ran out of things to say. People realized the three of them were not doing anything wrong. They were not breaking any laws. They were not starting fights. They were not walking around trying to hurt anyone. They were simply living together in a way the outside world did not have words for, but that the human heart could accept much more easily than the mind. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. Apache children came to the ranch to ask for water and always ended up squealing with laughter when Naya lifted them with one hand, as if they weighed nothing at all. White settlers came for seeds and cuttings, and Caleb would hand each one over himself, shy but kind. Coda taught the young men in town how to tie a rope the right way, how to ride without breaking their neck, how to listen to the wind and tell when the rain was coming. Bit by bit, the people of Red Butte understood something they never said out loud, but all quietly believed. The Turner Ranch had become one of the last truly safe places in that harsh country. Many years later, in the blue hour between sunset and full dark, when the insects hummed along with the desert wind, a traveler passing by might catch a sight they would not soon forget. On the porch, there were 3 silhouettes. Naya sat in the middle, so solid and tall she looked like the pillar holding the roof in place. Caleb sat on her left, one hand resting on his knee, the other close to her boot. Coda sat on her right, his arm braced on the step, his eyes turned toward the land as if he were quietly guarding the world they had built. They did not talk much, but their breaths rose and fell in the same slow rhythm. It was no longer the awkwardness of those early days, no longer the confusion of a past crashing into the present, no longer jealousy or division. It was the calm of 3 souls who had once believed they were meant to walk alone, now resting under the same piece of sky. No one in Red Butte spoke the words husband or wife. No one tried to decide what to call it. They did not need to. Anyone who saw them on that porch knew exactly what they were looking at. This was a family, made in its own rough Western way. A kind of love that did not stare backward in regret, did not bow to rumor, did not need papers or rings to prove itself. A love that only people who had lost almost everything could fully understand. A love built from the simple decision to lean on one another and keep going. And the most beautiful part was this: not one of the 3 ever left. In Red Butte, people kept whispering about the Turner Ranch for many years, not because 3 people lived under one roof in a way no one quite understood, but because of the peace they managed to hold on to. No matter the rumors, no matter the prejudice, no matter how rough and unforgiving the West around them remained. They said that on certain evenings, when the sun tilted low over the red sand, you could see Naya sitting on the porch, her body massive and strong, yet her eyes soft like the light at the end of the day. On one side sat Caleb, a worn old book in his hands. On the other side sat Coda, fingers busy with a bowstring or the edge of a spear. None of them talked much, yet anyone who really looked could see it in the rise and fall of their chests. 3 breaths, sharing the same rhythm. 3 people who had found their calm in each other. In a time when folks believed everything had to be either right or wrong, black or white, law or tradition, these 3 chose a road no one else dared to walk, simply because their hearts were big enough to hold more than the world said they were allowed to. And if one night you found yourself standing on the edge of Red Butte with the wind picking up, and you listened closely, you might just hear it, faint but real. The sound of their laughter inside that wooden house. The laughter of people who were not perfect, but who chose to live in a way they would never regret. If this story warmed your heart, even just a little, I hope you will stay with this channel. Hit subscribe and come with me through more windswept evenings of the Old West, where every story carries a piece of truth and a small piece of who we are.